Evan had never planned to fall asleep on the living room couch, but a long night of unfinished work and the soft hum of Seattle rain had dragged him under before he realized it. When morning came, he woke with a sharp jolt, confused by the warmth of sunlight brushing across his face and the tight tangle of the blanket around his legs. For a second, he didn't even know where he was, until a slow, controlled breath reached his ears. He blinked, forcing his eyes open, and froze instantly. Just a few inches away, moving with calm focus, was Claire, his roommate, his family friend, the woman who always carried herself with effortless balance. She was deep into her morning yoga routine, wearing her usual workout clothes, a sports bra and simple leggings, completely absorbed in her poses. The early sun poured around her, turning the whole room a soft gold. Evan's heart leapt into his throat, not because anything inappropriate was happening, nothing even close, but because the closeness, the unexpectedness, the almost dreamlike scene left his thoughts scrambling. He tried to move without startling her, but the couch springs gave him away, letting out a tiny squeak. Claire opened her eyes, and for the first time that morning, she realized he was awake. Her expression flickered, surprise first, then something softer, something unreadable, but she managed a small, breathless laugh as she straightened her posture. "Oh, wow, I didn't see you there," she said, brushing a stray hair behind her ear. Evan sat up quickly, cheeks warm, mumbling something about falling asleep while working. Claire shook her head gently, as if reassuring him that the situation wasn't embarrassing at all. But before either of them could ease into the moment, a sharp vibration broke the quiet. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at the screen, and in an instant, all the light left her face. Her shoulders dropped, her breath shook for just a second, and whatever softness had been there moments ago vanished. She picked up the phone, stared at it, then put it down face down without a word. Evan had seen people hide emotions before, but this was different, too quick, too practiced, too heavy. She whispered, almost to herself, "I need a minute," and walked to the balcony with that same quiet grace, though her steps were stiffer now, more tense. Evan stayed on the couch, rubbing his face, trying to shake away the awkwardness and the unexpected concern creeping over him. He'd known Claire for years, long before this apartment, long before this city, long before he ever imagined they would share a space under the same roof. She had always been the calm one, the person others leaned on. To see her shaken, even briefly, didn't feel right. He watched her through the glass door, standing with her arms crossed, staring out at the city as if looking for answers somewhere in the skyline. The morning light wrapped around her, but instead of making her look serene, it made her look fragile in a way Evan wasn't used to seeing. Something was bothering her. Something real. And he had no idea what it was. His mind spun, trying to make sense of her sudden shift, trying to understand why one message could hit her so hard. After several long minutes, Claire took a slow breath and came back inside. She didn't explain, didn't force a smile, didn't pretend everything was normal. She just walked past him gently, like she was carrying a weight she didn't want anyone else to notice. Evan wanted to say something, anything, but every thought felt too heavy for the quiet morning air. He eventually got up and made coffee, more as a peace offering than a routine. When he handed her the cup, she accepted it with both hands, as if the warmth steadied her. "Thank you," he murmured, her voice small but sincere. They didn't talk much after that. She sat at the kitchen table silently, staring at the window, while Evan hovered nearby, unsure whether to leave her alone or ask if she was okay. A strange uncertainty settled between them, gentle, not uncomfortable, but charged with something he couldn't name. It wasn't romantic, wasn't dramatic, just human. A moment where two people suddenly became aware of how vulnerable the other could be. As the minutes passed, the apartment felt different somehow, not in a bad way, just in a way that made Evan wonder if this morning was more important than it seemed. Claire finally lifted her eyes and offered him a small, tired smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. And Evan realized something quietly, without knowing why. This was the first time he had ever seen her unsure of herself. The first time she looked like she might need someone, even if she didn't want to admit it. The first time he felt that their lives, which had been running on separate paths even while sharing the same home, might be on the verge of shifting. He didn't know what the message on her phone meant, why it had shaken her so deeply, or what it might mean for the days ahead. But one thought kept echoing in his mind as they sat in the quiet kitchen: the morning wasn't just unusual. It was a beginning. A beginning he couldn't quite understand yet. A beginning he wasn't sure either of them was ready for. And as Claire looked down at her coffee, her fingers trembling ever so slightly, Evan felt something unmistakable in the air, something changing, something fragile, something that would pull them into a story neither of them had expected when the day began. Claire did not come back inside for a long time after stepping onto the balcony, and when she finally returned, her eyes were slightly red, though she tried to hide it with a tired smile that didn't match the calm way she usually carried herself. Evan didn't ask questions. Instead, he made her a fresh cup of coffee and placed it gently on the table, hoping it would offer some comfort. She thanked him softly, her voice thin, as if she was still caught between the morning sunlight and whatever shadow had fallen over her when she saw that message. They sat in the small kitchen, the room quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing through the wet Seattle streets. Evan kept glancing at her, not wanting to stare but unable to stop noticing the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept pressing her fingers to her temple, the way she breathed like she was trying to steady herself. Finally, Claire looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and something heavier, something close to sadness. "Have you ever felt like your life keeps moving, but you're stuck behind it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question wasn't dramatic, it was honest, simple, and for a moment, it surprised Evan because it came from the one person he always saw as collected and strong. He nodded, offering a small, understanding reply, and she held his gaze just a little longer than usual, as if she needed that small connection to keep herself from falling apart. For a brief moment, the room felt warmer, not romantic, not intense, just deeply human, two people sitting across from each other, sharing a moment of honesty that neither had planned for. Claire smiled softly, but it was the kind of smile someone wears when they are trying hard not to show how overwhelmed they feel. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she needed something solid to hold onto. Evan wanted to comfort her, but he didn't know how to reach for someone who didn't want to be a burden. He tried to lighten the mood by asking about her yoga class schedule for the week, but Claire shook her head and whispered, "Not right now." Her voice was gentle, almost apologetic. She looked like she was fighting back something, some thought she wasn't ready to share. Just when the air between them settled into a fragile calm, a sudden, hard knock rattled the front door. Claire's entire body tensed. Her hand jerked, and her coffee nearly spilled. Evan looked toward the door, confused, but Claire quickly stood, raising a hand for him to stay silent. "Please, let me handle this," she said softly, but her voice carried a tremor that made Evan's chest tighten. She walked to the door with slow steps, like every movement felt heavier than it should. Evan listened from the kitchen, unable to see who stood on the other side, but he could feel the pressure in the air. Claire opened the door only a few inches, her voice low and controlled, too low for Evan to catch her words. Whoever was there spoke in a firmer, harsher tone, muffled but unmistakably tense. Claire responded quickly, trying to keep the conversation short, her voice strained. After a few tense seconds, she shut the door, leaning against it as if her strength had drained. She took a shaky breath and walked back to the table without looking at Evan. He didn't push her, he knew she wasn't ready. But the fear on her face was clear, even though she tried to hide it behind a forced calm. Claire sank into her chair and stared at her coffee, swirling it slowly, as if trying to ground herself. Evan watched her, feeling more concerned than before. The person at the door wasn't just a random visitor, something about that interaction had shaken her deeply. After a long silence, she whispered, "I'm sorry you had to see me like this." Evan shook his head, but she continued, her voice trembling, "I'm usually better at keeping my life sorted, at keeping things in order." She pressed her fingertips to her forehead, frustration flickering in her expression. "I don't like letting people see the messy sides." Evan leaned forward slightly, speaking calmly, trying to make sure she felt safe. "You don't have to hide things from me." Claire laughed softly, but it wasn't happy, it was tired. "You say that like it's easy." She looked down, drawing slow circles on her mug. "Before you moved in, I didn't have anyone here. No one I trusted enough to be honest with." Her words landed heavier than she meant them to, and Evan felt something shift inside him, a mix of worry and something else, something protective. She took a breath and looked toward the door, her eyes full of something like fear. That person today, she paused, swallowing hard. He's someone I've been trying to forget. Someone who doesn't like being forgotten. Evan felt a wave of uneasiness settle over him, but he didn't interrupt. Claire brushed a hand through her hair, her fingers shaking slightly. I ended things. It wasn't dangerous. Just hard. And he didn't take it well. Evan didn't fully understand yet, but he could hear the weight in her voice. Claire continued, almost whispering, I thought he'd move on. I hoped he would. But he keeps showing up when I least expect it, like he thinks he can just step back into my life whenever he wants. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing slowly. And today, seeing him again, it just brought back everything I've been trying so hard to leave behind. Evan's chest tightened as he watched her struggle to steady herself. He didn't want to overwhelm her, but the urge to protect her, to reassure her, grew heavier by the second. Claire opened her eyes and finally met his gaze, her expression soft but full of conflict. I don't want him to take up space in my life anymore. I've worked too hard to find peace. She shook her head. But when he shows up like that, it feels like all the progress I made slips right through my fingers. Evan wanted to reach out, but he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. So he simply said, in a steady voice, You're not alone anymore. Claire looked at him for a long moment, her breath catching slightly as if his words hit somewhere she had been trying to keep guarded. That's what scares me, she whispered. It's been a long time since someone cared enough to stay. For a moment, the room went quiet again, but not empty, quiet in a meaningful, heavy way, as if their lives were slowly weaving into a new pattern neither of them had expected. The knock at the door, the message on the phone, the quiet confession, they were all pieces of a story just beginning to unfold, pulling them closer into a moment neither of them knew how to navigate, but both were afraid to step away from. All day, the apartment felt different, as if the air itself carried the weight of what had happened that morning. Claire moved quietly around the space, speaking only when she needed to, her thoughts clearly someplace far away. Evan tried to give her room, but every time he caught a glimpse of her, standing by the window, staring into her tea, pausing mid-step as if remembering something painful, he felt a deeper pull of concern he couldn't ignore. The rain outside grew soft and steady, brushing against the glass like a calming rhythm, but even the peaceful sound couldn't hide the tension in the room. That evening, as the city lights began to glow through the mist, Claire finally broke the silence. She sat across from Evan at the small dining table, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, her voice steady but thin. I'm sorry about today, she whispered. I didn't mean to bring all that energy into the apartment. Evan shook his head, ready to tell her she had nothing to apologize for, but she kept talking, her voice gaining a small tremor. I used to be better at hiding my feelings. At least, I thought I was. She sighed and leaned back, her expression raw in a way he had never seen before. You know, before you moved in, it was easier to pretend everything was fine. When you don't have anyone around, you don't have to explain yourself. You can just push things aside and hope they disappear. She gave a faint, sad laugh. But you being here, I don't know. It makes everything feel real. It makes me feel seen in a way I'm not used to. Evan listened, choosing not to speak yet, sensing she needed to let this out. Claire exhaled slowly, staring at the window as rain streaked down the glass. I didn't expect to trust you this fast, she admitted quietly. I didn't expect to feel safe. The word hung between them, delicate and honest. Evan felt something shift inside him, not romantic, not intense, but deeply meaningful. A gentle warmth. A protective instinct. Claire rubbed her hands together, trying to warm her fingers, and whispered, It scares me how much I want to believe things can get better now. Evan leaned forward, understanding more with every word she said. Before he could respond, Claire's voice softened even more. That man at the door today, he wasn't violent or anything. He just wasn't good for me. And the hardest part was admitting it. Ending things felt like tearing a piece of myself away. She looked down at her hands. When someone you care about doesn't respect your boundaries, it changes you. It makes you question everything. Evan felt anger rise, not at her, but at whoever had caused her this hurt. But he kept his voice gentle. You did the right thing walking away. Claire nodded slowly, though her expression said she still doubted herself. I keep telling myself that, she said. But when he shows up, unannounced, uninvited, it makes me feel like I'm losing control again. Like I'm back in that place where I convinced myself his attention was caring, not controlling. She let out a shaky laugh. I worked so hard to rebuild myself after that. I learned yoga, teaching, breathing, anything to feel grounded again. She looked at Evan, her eyes clear but vulnerable. And now, suddenly, you're here. And it feels like I'm not fighting alone anymore. Evan felt his heart tighten, not out of romance but out of empathy so strong it almost hurt. He wanted to take away every fear she carried. He wanted her to feel safe again, comfortable, steady. You're not alone, he said quietly. Claire held his gaze for a long moment, something warm flickering in her eyes, gratitude, relief, maybe even trust. That means more than you know, she whispered. They sat like that for a while, the soft rain filling the silence in a comforting rhythm. The tension that had been suffocating the apartment all day slowly began to loosen. But just as they felt the calm settling in, Claire's phone buzzed again, the sharp vibration cutting through the peace like a blade. Claire froze. The color drained from her face. Evan watched as her hand trembled slightly before she reached for the phone. She turned the screen over, saw the name, and exhaled a breath that shook through her whole body. Her ex again. Claire swallowed hard and put the phone face down, pressing her palms to the table as if steadying herself. She whispered, almost too quietly to hear, why won't he let go? Evan felt a protective rush surge through him. You don't have to deal with this alone, he said, firmer now but still gentle. Claire looked up, her eyes shining with unshed emotion. Evan. I don't know what's happening between us, she said carefully. But you're becoming someone I depend on. And that scares me. Evan took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. It's okay to let someone help you. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. Claire looked at him with a mixture of fear and hope, as if wanting to believe him but not knowing if she could. I'm trying, she whispered. The rain continued tapping softly against the windows, almost like a heartbeat. For a moment, they just breathed in the same quiet space, the energy between them new and uncertain but undeniably real. Then Claire spoke again, her voice shaking just enough to show how much the moment meant. Thank you for being here today, she said. If you hadn't been, I don't know how I would have handled all this. And in that fragile, honest moment, the distance between them felt smaller than ever. Something unspoken was forming, a connection built on trust, on shared vulnerability, on the simple truth that two people who barely understood each other's pasts were slowly beginning to understand each other's hearts. When Claire finally spoke again that night, her voice was so soft Evan almost missed it, and the weight of everything she had kept buried all day slipped through her words like water slipping through trembling hands. She told him she ended the relationship months ago because she had realized she was losing herself trying to keep someone else happy, that every promise he made felt comforting in the moment but left her empty later, and she confessed that she had stayed longer than she should have because she thought she could fix something that was never hers to fix. And as she talked, Evan stayed completely still, giving her space, knowing this wasn't a moment for advice or quick comfort but for quiet listening, the kind people offer when they genuinely want to understand. Claire admitted that leaving had been the hardest decision she had made in years, harder than building a new career, harder than moving across states, harder even than learning to be alone after being part of someone else's world for so long, and she said that every time she felt stronger, every time she thought she was finally moving on, her ex would appear again, sending a message, calling late at night, showing up at her door like he did that morning, never aggressive, never cruel, but always with the same tone that made her feel guilty for choosing herself, the same tone that made her question if she had been wrong to walk away. She said she hated that part of her still reacted to his presence, not with longing but with confusion, as if her heart couldn't keep up with the bravery of her choices, and Evan felt that ache in her words, the kind of ache that comes from trying so hard to heal while someone keeps reopening the doorway to the past. The rain outside grew steadier as she spoke, tapping against the windows like a slow rhythm guiding her breathing, and she said she didn't want to live a life where she was always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the next knock on the door or the next message that made her stomach twist, and she placed her hand over her chest as if reminding herself her heartbeat still belonged to her. Evan leaned forward, keeping his voice steady as he told her she had made the right choice protecting her peace, that walking away from someone who drains you is one of the bravest acts a person can make, and she looked at him with eyes full of something fragile, trust, hope, maybe even relief, because no one had ever said those words to her without conditions attached. She whispered that she was embarrassed he had witnessed her breaking down, but he told her gently that vulnerability wasn't weakness, and if anything, today had shown how strong she really was for facing her past instead of pretending it didn't exist, and Claire looked away, swallowing hard, as if trying to stop another wave of emotion from rising. Then her phone buzzed again, cutting through the quiet like a sharp breath, and she flinched before she even looked at the screen, the fear so sudden and real that Evan reached out without touching her, just placing his hand on the table near hers in silent reassurance, and Claire turned the phone over slowly, her jaw tightening when she saw her ex's name glowing across the screen. She put the phone face down immediately, her breath unsteady as she said, "I don't want to feel like this anymore," and Evan nodded, telling her she didn't have to, that she didn't have to deal with any of this alone, that she didn't have to pretend it wasn't affecting her. And something in Claire's face softened as if the wall she had been holding up all day finally cracked. She whispered that she was afraid of dragging someone else into her mess, afraid of becoming someone's burden, afraid of letting anyone too close again because closeness came with expectations she wasn't sure she could meet. But Evan told her closeness doesn't have to mean pressure, that she didn't owe him perfection or explanations or anything she wasn't ready to give, and the truth in his voice made her eyes fill with tears she had been holding back since morning. She wiped them quickly, embarrassed. But Evan didn't look away, and in the quiet, she said, "I don't know what this is between us, but it's been a long time since someone made me feel like I could breathe," and the sincerity in her words hit him with a sudden warmth, not romantic or dramatic, but deeply human, the warmth that comes from knowing someone trusts you enough to be real with you. She asked him, almost hesitantly, if he would stay in the living room with her that night, not because she was scared of anything happening, but because she didn't want to sit alone in the silence waiting for another call she didn't want to receive, and Evan agreed immediately, not out of obligation but out of genuine care. They moved to the couch, the warm lamp light softening the tension in the room, and Claire sat close enough for him to feel her presence but not pressing for comfort she didn't ask for, and they talked about small things at first, work, the noisy neighbor upstairs, the funny way Seattle weather changed every 10 minutes, little moments that helped her breathe easier. Gradually, the heaviness of the day eased, replaced by a gentle calm, the kind that comes when two people sit together without pretending or forcing anything, simply sharing space in a way that felt grounding. Claire whispered that she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know if her ex would call again or if she would feel strong enough to face whatever came next, but she said she felt braver with someone beside her, and Evan told her he wasn't going anywhere, that she didn't have to figure everything out at once, that healing wasn't a linear path but she was already moving in the right direction. She leaned her head lightly against the back of the couch, not on him but near enough for him to feel the warmth of her presence, and she closed her eyes as if letting the moment settle into her bones, and for the first time since morning, her shoulders loosened, her breathing slowed, her whole posture softening with quiet relief. The rain outside grew gentle, a steady whisper across the glass, and Claire said softly, almost to herself, "Maybe this is the first time I've felt safe in months," and Evan understood the weight of those words, the quiet power of them, and he sat beside her, steady and present, knowing this was not the end of their story, not even close, but the beginning of something fragile and hopeful, the kind of beginning that comes after a person chooses themselves and slowly learns to trust the world again.